Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation History number 27. We're going to look at British myths today. As always, I'm going to start us off with a bit of a tune.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wild. Your new gods sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love that heed and folly? Bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, a loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall wail gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy ungrudged praise. Come thou to search your manhood through all of thankless years. No age with give or wisdom that
That was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. Please go and check out his YouTube channel if you like good music. Okay, this evening we're going to be talking about British myths. I'm not going to pretend this is a subject that I'm an expert in, but Aaron Hook here wanted to speak about it, so go ahead, Aaron.
Yes, of course. Thank you for bringing me on, Duke. This is something I've always had an interest in, going back since I was a kid. There's so many interesting myths about Britain, and a lot of them have sort of connections with sort of, in many cases, biblical myths and the myths of classical world, particularly Rome, and also Troy. But there's also the ones that just are just interesting because they seem to be unique, and they seem to possibly have some reality, some real basis for them in the past. They're sort of from which all the sort of legends and myths were built. And I thought I'd start with probably one that almost everybody will know. They might not know what this refers to, but they will know the line. There's obviously the hymn Jerusalem, which is based on a poem by William Blake called "And Did Those Streets in Ancient Times," which is obviously the start of the poem that goes, "And did those streets ancient times walk upon England's mountains green, and was the holy Lamb of God on England's England's pleasant pastures seen." And that is a direct reference to Jesus. So this comes from a lot of sort of myths that come from the West Country, particularly sort of Cornwall and Somerset and Devon, where the idea is that during what were known as the lost years of the unknown years of Jesus, so this is roughly between the ages of about 12 and about 29, that we don't know what he did. And so all sorts of myths have grown up around this. He travelled all over the place. There's some suggestions he went to India, to Tibet, to China. So there's legends of him going. I think there's even the legend of him going to Japan. In one local myth out there. But one of the sort of big claims that starts in the Middle Ages is that Jesus came to Britain. And so the idea is this: that Joseph Arimathea, his uncle, was a trader, and obviously Britain at the time, particularly Cornwall, was well known. In that point of the period up pretty much the 19th century, well known as a tin mining area in Britain. And so the idea is that tin was being traded into Europe, and Joseph Arimathea travelled as a part of his trade as a trader, and came to what's now the West Country, and started trading all sorts of stuff, and notably tin, and Jesus came with him. And so you have these various locations around the West Country where he's meant to have stayed, and Joseph Arimathea is meant to have stayed. So one of the most notable places is in Cornwall, in a place called St. Just's in Roseland Church, which is said to be the place where Jesus and Joseph Joseph landed in Britain, which is in Cornwall. And
I can't say, Aaron, that the Jews were noted merchant sailors, but okay. I did. That song was actually played at my wedding, but yeah, all right.
Yeah, and it's more to do with that. I think the story is that he's working with Roman traders, so he goes up there.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look, plenty of people came from the Mediterranean to buy Cornish tin. That's certainly true.
Yeah, and I can see how guys brought it up about there being about everyone. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about particularly Joseph Arimathea and Glastonbury. So, for example, you've probably heard of the Holy Thorn joke from Glastonbury, which is that's said to have been created. I seem to remember it's from where Joseph Arimathea put a staff in the ground, and that caused the holy caused it to grow, and then from that, I don't know how far this actually goes back, but the royal family had a string of it sent up at Christmas time to I think winter.
I wonder if they still do. given how anti-Christian King Charles III seems to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay.
So you get things like that. I know at least George V certainly did it, because I remember reading newspaper reports about him having it brought up to Windsor during his reign. Particularly, I think the report I saw was in 1927. So it's put a big connection there, and obviously that area of the country is going to come a bit more when we go on to, say, King Arthur, because that's where a lot of the claims around him are based, at least to a degree. So you have that sort of that legend going on there, which is expressed through Jerusalem and through the original poem.
Cool.
Also, there's also sort of connections there to other things. There's suggestions by some that Britain is actually Atlantis. The people mistook legends about Britain for being Atlantis, and also they mistook. Some people also claim that Britain was people mistook Britain for Hyperborea as well. So these sort of mythical claims, or this idea of Britain being this mythical place up north, people don't actually know about. It's quite a sort of long thing into the classical mind, which is interesting to think.
Well, I mean, Britain's pretty wet, but I didn't think it was actually underwater. But yeah. Fair enough.
I mean, I suppose if you're a Roman who's lived all your life in, let's say, Egypt, one question, you come to Britain, you'd imagine a proper British downpour might be like the end of the world.
Okay. Yeah. I said before I started this stream, I don't know much about British myths. Can't say I've heard that one. But yeah, Atlantis, okay. Like I said, Britain can be pretty damp sometimes.
Yeah.
Underwater, perhaps not so much.
I think that might stem from some very, very old sort of memories and sort of passage sort of from mouth to mouth of the end of Doggerland. There's been suggestions that many very old people remembering that, which might...
The land bridge between Europe and Britain, yeah, maybe.
So that might very well be where it comes from. Now I'm going to move on to another figure who will probably be far more well known to people, but almost certainly more well known, which is Robin Hood. So
he's one I know something about, and who, thanks to Brie, by the way, was in the thumbnail. So
it's so Robin Hood. The general idea of him is he's a man who robs from the poor, gives to the rich. He's also very devout Christian. He's very much
a Saxon nobleman who still supports King Richard the Lionheart.
Yeah, this is interesting. That sort of develops. With Robin Hood, with Robin Hood may well be either a real person or a name used by real outlaws. Mm-hmm. This idea of it being a sort of, how Joe Bloggs or John Doe is a sort of name used. Right? We think that might be one possible reason where the name came from, and so sort of legends of this outlaw operating sort of somewhere in England. Interestingly, there is a strong contested debate over where Robin Hood actually came from, because obviously Nottinghamshire is where legendarily he came from, but people in Yorkshire claim he came from Wakefield. There's a strong campaign for a Yorkshireman.
I've also heard it said he may have been based on a real Anglo-Saxon chap who lived in Kent as well.
Yes, Herod the Wake. That's the chap. Yeah. So and Herod the Wake Herod the Wake was a real person. So that may well be, as you say, another area where it's sort of memories of that. real outlaws using the name, and also sometimes I think in court records the name was just added as a one size fits all name. So it's very likely a combination of those. As with all sorts of legendary figures, Robin Hood's tales predate before it being put down in print. So we have references to Robin Hood as a sort of a name. The idea that there's tales about him that goes back to the earliest reference to that is in the 1370s with a poem called Piers Plowman, where at the beginning, I think it's in the prologue of that, you have the narrator being asked by people, "Are you going to tell us tales?" And one of them says, "Are you going to give us the rhymes of Robin Hood?" And then there's a few sort of there's a later poem that comes out where the narrator in that at the beginning is complaining quite funnily that people will be more interested in reading or hearing about the activities of Robin Hood than they are to go to mass, which is quite funny because when you read the tales themselves, the original tales that we've got written down, he is very much a man, a devotee to the Virgin Mary and a strong supporter of Christianity and very critical of people not going to mass and also abuses within the church. Now, the first sort...
You have Friar Tuck as well, Aaron, don't
yes.
you? Who is supposed to be a jolly but very Christian monk.
Yeah, and the first real written sort of surviving text of Robin Hood's tales is a thing written in the second half of the 15th century, we think. So that's, for those who want to sort of give that a map that onto events, that's the War of the Roses in England. And you get in there the reference, you get all sort of proper sort of the cast of characters appear there. So you've obviously got Robin Hood, you've got Little John, you have the Sheriff of Nottingham is the villain, Friar Tuck, and you have Robin Hood's death of the Kirklees Abbey in Yorkshire. Is there in a final part of that in the final part of this thing called The Jest of Robin Hood, which is titled The Death of Robin Hood. And interestingly, though, in this one, though we obviously associate Robin Hood with Richard the Lionheart and King John, the king in these tales is King Edward, and historians think that refers to Edward II. So the original stories, as we have them, are set pretty much around 100 years, give or take a few decades, after when traditionally we'd see them portrayed on screen and in books from pretty much the 19th century onwards, which is something I'm not sure how many people know that.
No, I certainly didn't. Edward II, I've heard Edward III. No, sorry, Edward I, but I didn't realise some of them were Edward II. That's cool.
Yeah, there's one particular one where he actually meets King Edward, and from the description, it does seem like it's Edward II. One of the things about Edward II that people, a man who himself has been much mythologized in a negative way, but one of the things about him was he was a deeply religious man, and so he did go around investing chapels and was very devout, and he was, and also he had an element to him that he had sort of the common touch. So when he met his subjects, they got on with him, and so that's one reason why people think, the way he's portrayed in this particular section of The Jest of Robin Hood, it's more likely to be, of the three Edwards, Edward II.
Interesting.
Yeah.
No, that's something I didn't know. Yeah, cool. I think the Robin Hood myths are interesting. I think there's probably several real people who they might be based on.
Yeah.
And maybe the actual Robin Hood myths are a combination of several of those people, perhaps.
Yeah. I think that's most likely the way he came about. It's stories about one person building on another, and then the name gets attached, and sort of it just expands from there.
That makes sense. That's what I always thought it probably was, because I mean, Britain actually lost most of its myths because of the Norman conquest, basically. Like all of the old, I won't say all, but most of the old Anglo-Saxon myths were lost because they were not recorded after the Battle of Hastings and William the Bastard winning that battle. That resulted in the loss of a lot of English common folks myths. And like, the two famous ones which still survive are Robin Hood and King Arthur, although King Arthur, as far as I understand it, although I'm sure you'll correct me, Aaron, is mostly actually a French myth, really.
It's got a basis of sort of not just pre-Norman but pre-Anglo-Saxon British myth to there, but very much it's a lot of what we know, what we think of King Arthur is very much Norman French, 11th, 12th, 13th century additions to it. It's very, as I believe J.R. Tolkien was described, it's very Frenchified.
Yeah, Le Mort d'Arthur and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
One thing I would just add a bit more about Robin Hood is sort of how we get to the image of him today. That's sort of the idea of him being in, as you referenced to, the idea of being an Anglo-Saxon loyal to Richard the Lionheart and being the Earl of Huntingdon and things like that. That actually comes from Sir Walter Scott, who wrote a book called Ivanhoe, which has been adapted into films many times. I've probably seen the very famous and really good version from the 50s with Robert Taylor. And so in that, many of the ideas of Robin Hood, so as being that idea in the popular image, comes from Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott, which is not that surprising given that Sir Walter Scott essentially, in his Waverley novels, which he wrote from roughly about 1814 up until 1830, essentially created the idea of the historical novel as a genre in literature. So the fact that he does that with Robin Hood is sort of, it was there for him to pick. And so very much the ideas are particularly the setting. So Ivanhoe is set during the 1190s, and so Robin Hood is put into that. And Ivanhoe is very much loyal to Richard the Lionheart, and King John is a villain in that. And so that's what, from there you get King John be adapted into the Robin Hood tales as a villain, as sort of the over villain to the Sheriff of Nottingham. And so from Ivanhoe onwards, you have sort of development of that. And this author, the American author who wrote things for children, Turner Pyle, he did a book called The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1910, which really shows Robin Hood after he's gone through Ivanhoe and Sir Walter Scott. And then that is one of the big sources for the Errol Flynn film in 1938. And so that film really cements our idea of Robin Hood in that sort of post-Ivanhoe, post-Walter Scott world, as it were.
I remember when I was a small boy in England, there was a weekly children's TV show on BBC that was Robin Hood. That had Robin Hood and Maid Marian and Little John and all these people. And it was pretty good, actually, if you were a little kid, because I used to watch it anyway. So, was that with Richard Green? Yes, Richard Green. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, there was actually an earlier one, only a few years. Well, it was a few years earlier with Patrick Troughton playing Robin Hood of all people, which was quite funny. And then there was one when I was a kid, which I was still fond of. That had Joe Armstrong, I think it was, playing Robin Hood. It was. He said it wasn't. It was nowhere near as good as those Richard Green versions.
Yeah, the Richard Green ones were not bad. Yeah. I mean, they didn't have a huge budget, but they used to have quite a lot of reasonable actors in them, and back in those days there was no race swapping or anything like that. So, they were quite good adventure stories for a little boy, as I was when I used to watch that. So
and to explain how popular they were in Britain and to a degree in the United States at the time, Richard Green got asked to play Robin Hood in a couple of films made by Hammer at the same time, off the back of the success of that TV series.
Cool.
Yeah. So,
and of course, the other thing about Robin Hood is that he's an archer, and
yes.
That was what ordinary English warriors were in the Middle Ages. They were archers, so there's that too.
Yeah, and actually, now you mentioned that does also remind me that that's another reason why people think the stories are set into the reign of Edward, one of the Edwards. It's because of the use of the longbow that it wasn't actually as popular a weapon for the British for the English as a whole during the reign of Richard Lionheart and King John, as it was during definitely the reign of the three Edwards.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely, yeah. The English, the English and the Welsh longbowmen, of course, became immortally famous in the 100 Years' War, but that didn't start until the 1200s. So yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, the 1300s actually. But yeah.
Actually, one thing I will say now, just say this, is that some people have suggested, to my mind, disingenuously, that the Robin Hood stories are the reason why King John has a bad name. That's not true. King John was just not a very good king. It's not because of Robin Hood. Yeah, no.
Well, didn't he semi-invite a French invasion and stuff like that?
Yes, he did. Yeah, well, his misrule was so bad, the English nobleman invited the heir of the King of France to come over and be king for a year. Yeah, and of course he lost Normandy to the French. So
yeah, the Angevin Empire. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we will not have any of this nonsense about Robin Hood blacking the name of King John. King John didn't need any help with blacking his name.
I don't think he did. But I always think it's interesting that Richard the Lionheart, of course, even though he wasn't in England for very long, was actually a very popular king. Of course, he was a very successful crusader, but
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of that essentially the fact that one, as you say, he was successful. That's one of the needs from medieval one. The other one that because of his success, he would have brought money back to the country, and also any sort of mishandling of justice would have technically been in his name. He would have been by the men ruling the country instead, and so they would have got the blame, not him.
Yeah, because of course, in the traditional stories, Robin Hood is fighting for the king's justice.
Yeah.
And it's because the king isn't at home that he has to fight against the Sheriff of Nottingham and John and all these corrupt bastards, basically.
Yeah. That's very much a part of it, and that itself goes back to sort of the original tales where Robin Hood is very much attacking what he regards as the corruption within the church, and so you can see that's a thread running through all the stories. That sense of fighting corruption and fighting for the traditional rule of England, as it were.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, Aaron.
So I think at this point, I think we'll move on to the one that if you're British and you don't know this one, I'll be very surprised, which is King Arthur. So King Arthur is something that goes back to the pre-Anglo-Saxon period. So this is in terms of the legends. So it is. Let me just get the details up just for a second. So it goes back to the Annals of Cambria and History Praetorium, and Nennius, who's a writer, a Welsh writer of the period. And in that, Arthur is described as a dux bellorum, which translates, depending on who you ask, as either leader of men or warlord. And he is described as this great warrior who's, interestingly, despite what we think nowadays, given the sort of build of legends around it, he was not a Christian. He was seen as the enemy of Christ. And he's also seen as a strong opponent of the Saxons coming in, and so generally the idea is he is able to hold off the Saxons for about a generation, and that makes him a great hero of the Britons.
But the only thing I didn't get there, Aaron, and this is the other one I know a little bit about, apart from Robin Hood, is that you say he was not Christian. As I understood it, the Romanized Britons, who Arthur comes from, were Christians, whereas the Anglo-Saxons, when they first invaded, were not. So that's the only bit that puzzles me about that one.
Yeah, it's more an issue of the fact that obviously the Roman Britons were obviously Christianized, but that there's a suggestion that that wasn't true for all of them, and that his actions were seen as being made him an enemy of Christ. And also the issue you've got there is this is being written by a non-Anglo-Saxon sort of Welsh writer, but after the Christianizing mission being said by the Augustus of Canterbury mission being set.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know that at all. That's quite curious if you think about it, because the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes and what have you, who invaded after the Romans withdrew, those guys were initially pagans, and I mean even Alfred the Great claimed descendancy from Woden, but the Romano-British had been Christianized, as you say.
Yeah, it's very much in some ways it's sort of a lot of rewriting of history, where you're looking at it from the point of view of those who have been re-Christianized in some cases by Augustus of Canterbury's conversion mission, and so they're looking back at people like Arthur, some of the Roman Britons, and thinking, right, they weren't proper Christians. They weren't. It's pretty proper communication with Rome in the way that people at the time when Lewis is writing was very much in proper communication with Rome, religiously speaking.
That's interesting, and of course, you say he was a Dux, and Dux was where we get the word Duke, and they were indeed late Roman military commanders, basically.
Yeah, and one of the people that they may have been based on Arthur is Aurelius Ambrosius, who was, as far as we can tell in reality, as opposed to the mythos build-up, was a Roman Briton, and he was seemingly sent over from Gaul to sort of help the Roman British deal with their defences and sort of military, and help them win militarily against the encroaching Anglo-Saxon Jutes and Frisians, and the people coming over from the Frisian coast and into Denmark at that time.
Okay. That, again, interesting. I mean, as far as I understand it, like a lot of the King Arthur stuff is actually medieval French.
Yeah, it's a build up of sort of not Norman, but sort of post-Norman sort of Anglo-French development. So the idea of the Holy Grail, if Arthur going after the Holy Grail, very much comes from that. It comes from Chrétien de Troyes, writing in the 12th. The 12th century, and then you get Arthur of it's Geoffrey of Monmouth, who writes his History of Britain, and that's where he brings in Arthur, and that he brings in stuff from Chrétien, I think it's Chrétien de Troyes, and other bits of sort of folklore. And one of the things that I think people today, because we have essentially, like Robin Hood, King Arthur gets put through gets a sort of a translation into the modern era through the 19th century. So a lot of the sort of myths in the Middle Ages, myths and legends of Arthur, you get in the Middle Ages that have gone through this sort of Frenchification, shall we say, is that Arthur ends up not merely being king of Britain, but king of Britain and the ruler of essentially an empire in Western Europe. His kingdom rules over the whole of the British Isles, also include Ireland. He rules over Gaul, modern day France, Iberia, so the Iberian Peninsula, that's Spain and Portugal, and even these and all into the gates of Rome itself. It's this astonishing epic in many ways of these stories. And there's also interesting things like that in these tales we get the first sort of references to the possible theory of where Stonehenge comes from. So one of the legends has it that the stones were brought over from Ireland after a campaign by Uther, Pendragon, Arthur's father, and Merlin. And then Merlin has it set up, which is an interesting one. As far as we know, that's one of the earliest theories we have for what Stonehenge is for.
Okay. I didn't know that. I've got to say, I've always thought the Arthur stuff was pretty Frenchified, rather than native English. But I mean, as you say, even if some of it was native Britain, it was probably more Welsh than English, I guess.
Yeah, very much so. It's very much, with the original Arthur stories, you're pretty much dealing with something that's pre-Anglo-Saxon, sort of Romo-British, sort of Celtic British, so what are now the modern-day Welsh. And that's the thing we should always, I think that's one thing that people do seem to forget, that when the people that Arthur is fighting are the people who will become the English.
They're the Anglo-Saxons, exactly. Yeah. I remember. I'm not the biggest fan of Bernard Cornwall for assorted reasons, but I don't mind his Last Kingdom books, which are kind of about the Anglo-Saxons. But he's also got a series about Arthur, I believe.
Yes.
And I always found those very confusing to try and read.
Yeah, they're called the Warlord Chronicles. I think they are, in order, the Winter King, Excalibur, maybe, and then Enemy of God. I think that's the order. But they were very much Bernard Cornwall trying to come up with a historical idea of what Arthur would have been, and so that's it. I can say I do enjoy them, but they are. I will accept that. I agree they can be quite confusing, and though interestingly, not last Sunday but the Sunday before, myself and Duke did a live stream about sort of classical era war films.
Oh yeah, you liked an Arthur film, didn't you? I remember that.
Yeah. And that one's King Arthur from 2004, and that's that inspired by, I think the director had read Bernard Cornwall's Warlord Chronicles, and he decided he wanted to do something similar, a sort of a historical King Arthur story, and so that's where that comes from. And so,
okay, yeah, interesting. Aaron, I don't want to ruin your order or what you're going to talk about, but another one of the English and British myths I know about is Brutus. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. This is actually one of the, like with Jesus coming to the West Country, this is something where British mythology is very much connected to mythology of the ancient world. So,
is he a Trojan, Aaron? I believe something like that.
Yeah, he is. Right, it's either. Now, this for those that connects to Roman myth of Aeneas, who is a son of King Primus. A cousin of King Primus of Troy, and he goes off he escapes Troy when it's taken and goes and settles in Rome, and then either Brutus's father Silvius is either his son or his grandson, and Brutus goes off to Britain. And he essentially followed like his own father or grandfather. And I say father or grandfather because in the myth, I believe Brutus kills his father with an arrow and then he's banished from Italy. And so he goes wandering. So I don't know if he kills Aeneas or Aeneas' son. But either way, that's what causes Brutus to eventually end up in Britain, because he sort of wanders around sort of Gaul and the Tyrian Sea, and then founding the city of Tours in France, and then sort of ends up in Britain. And so he becomes the king of Britain that way. And they land, so it's very much that's where it comes from. So he starts out, I believe he starts out in Cornwall and then makes his way through the whole Britain. Interestingly, he fights a giant called Magog, who's sort of the shoot. It actually is his cousin, I believe. Who fought, well, no, it's Brutus's one of his close warriors who fights.
How old is that one, Aaron? Do you know?
Well, it goes back, I believe, to the Historia Regnum Britannia. So that one again is a part of it's part of the matter of Britain. So it goes to Geoffrey of Monmouth.
Okay.
Middle Ages. So yeah. So I mean, again, that's sort of that again we get that really is a part of the Christian influence. So obviously Christianity brings the Roman stuff in, and so there's a connection. This is also something that happens in Ireland as well with the book of I think it's called the Book of Kells, where there's a connection between the Irish, the ancestors of the Irish being people who settled from I think some from Troy, but also some from the Holy Land as well. So that idea of the connection, this is all a part of this happened in Ireland and elsewhere. It's giving the sort of peoples of Europe a connection to the biblical past, that they are the descendants of, as well as sort of classical era. So the descendants of both Noah and usually the Trojans. And so that's what you eventually hear.
I mean, like Aeneas in Roman mythology is, I think these days recognized as the Romans wanting to be in classical Greek myth, basically.
Yeah.
And probably Brutus is like a later version of that for the Brits, I guess.
Yeah, very much so. And with Brutus, this very much and there's a Monmouth gives a long sort of list of historical kings of Britain. Brutus being the first one, and of course, right down the list is Arthur. So there's a sort of bringing these myths together and sort of establishing as a sort of mythology, a sort of pseudo history or mythological history of Britain for particularly the English. This is being written for, and sort of the post-Norman conquest, essentially Plantagenet world. And
although it's worth pointing out that there is actually a real link between England and Rome in the after 1066, when the Anglo-Saxons were sadly defeated by the Normans and William the Bastard. Quite a lot of English noblemen and English warriors went to Constantinople and joined the Wangerian Guard there. And actually, after 1066, the Eastern Roman Wangerian Guard became majority English eventually. So there is actually a real connection between Englishmen and the last of the Roman Empire, which was what these days we call Byzantium, but was actually the Eastern Roman Empire.
Yeah, was I'm not sure if you saw this, Duke, about a week or two ago. There was a post going around, somebody asking when Rome fell, and there was a huge debate going on between people who argued it fell in it was the fall of Rome itself, or whether it was the fall of Constantinople.
Well, it was the fall of Constantinople, and it was a long time later than most people think it was. I remember a long time ago now when Academic Agent was still doing his several weekly streams at a reasonable time, and he had this debate. He was trying to say, "Oh no, Byzantium, Constantinople, wasn't Roman," and even he had to admit in the end, after many people pointed out the truth to him, that actually Constantinople, that was the Eastern Roman Empire, and they were indeed Romans. So
yeah, they are. And if people don't understand why that is, just think about the name Constantinople. It is named after Constantine the Great, founded by Constantine the Great.
Absolutely, and the Eastern Roman Empire, even in Julius Caesar's time, the eastern part of the Roman Empire always was Greek speaking. Educated Romans spoke Latin and Greek, but the eastern part was always day-to-day speech was Greek. It wasn't Latin, and that's why the Byzantians spoke Greek. They called the emperors in Constantinople. They called themselves the Romans, and they did so for a reason. They were the Romans, so
Yeah, absolutely. I've always wondered if part of that country of Edward Gibbon, because he in his history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, does sort of have a go at the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, and I think that in part might be to do with it. But also, I think there's a sense of the fact that they're in the East, and when we think of Rome, we do think of the city of Rome itself, and so
yeah. Although even the Western Empire wasn't governed from Rome by the time it fell. Like Rome was it was a big city, but it wasn't militarily important for quite a long time before even the Western Roman Empire fell.
Yeah.
But I do think there's an interesting thing that, the last of the Roman emperors in Constantinople, their bodyguard ended up being Englishmen who were Anglo-Saxons who left after William the Bastard's victory. I think there's something quite interesting about that, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also, and of course, I think there's the sort of decline of the Eastern Roman Empire in that sort of final sort of couple of hundred years is interesting as well, just because it seems to go.
Not least, of course, the Western Crusaders who
yes,
but that didn't help. But anyway,
So I just had a bit more. Obviously, that list I mentioned of the kings of Britain, that ends interestingly with Cadwallader, who of course is the king of Gwynedd. So it's that sense of Britain being this very much pre-Anglo-Saxon world. And so you got and so very much this is, and so Arthur is fitted in that being Frenchified but trying to sort of jigsaw it in with the remaining British myths to survive and the remaining Anglo-Saxon myths to survive. And so it's very much a development over centuries, particularly during the Middle Ages. But then you get later on during the sort of the Renaissance, a sense of the idea of courtly love and the idea of the knight. That idea we have of Arthur playing sort of suits of armour and going after the Holy Grail and being very much a sort of essentially a Christian saint in a way, comes from the medieval period, and then that gets developed in England itself and then Britain after the Reformation as sort of as a part of our Christian heritage. That develops from the reign of Henry VIII up into Henry VIII was had a great interest in King Arthur and the Round Table, as did Edward III, and so this is something very much developed. And then when you go into the 19th century, you have all the sort of build of all this sort of streamlined and made into something that could fit into novel form. And so throughout the 19th century, you have King Arthur novels, and it becomes almost, and since the 19th century, it's been almost a sort of tradition that if you are a successful novelist, you will put out an Arthur novel. sometime in your career, a sort of way of showing that you have arrived as a novelist.
Aaron, can I ask you, when does the cuckoldry with Guinevere and all that stuff come into it? Is that a modern thing, or was that in the French medieval tales?
That was in the medieval tales. That is very much a medieval edition.
Interesting. Like I said, very French. But
Yes.
it's not the sort of thing you find in English myth, if you ask me.
No.
But anyway, I was talking about that to somebody yesterday when we were looking for thumbnails for the stream, and we found a lovely thumbnail, but it was Guinevere, and I said, "No, I'm not using that." So,
Actually, there's one more myth I will add, and this actually has a reference as a link to the British Empire and the development of the British Empire, which is that of Prince Madoc and his travels to Wales. His travels to what is now America. So the myth goes that the King of Gwynedd died, and his sons were fighting over who would rule. And one of his sons, Madoc, got so sickened by this that he went off. He sailed off out to the west, out to the sea beyond Ireland, and landed, and then supposedly landed in America. And so there's all sorts of these sort of legends about Welsh-speaking Indians in the Americas, and this also builds on an older legend of St. Brendan, an Irish monk who is said to have gone over to what is now the Americas and Christianized some of the Indians there.
Well, there's very good evidence, Aaron, that the Norse Vikings certainly did land there. Like there's quite a lot of archaeological evidence that the Norse got there long before Christopher Columbus.
Oh yeah, and in fact, I believe there are actually records from the Norse where they spoke to where they had some interactions with the Indians, and they mention They mention sort of white men being there with processions and having white banners. And these are Indians who have no connection or understanding or have even been told about the legends of St. Brendan. So this idea of that, so it might not be just a myth of St. Brendan going to the Americas. It may well really have happened.
There could be truth in it because the Norse Vikings certainly did. There's archaeological evidence in parts of what's now Canada that there were Norsemen there. So, perfectly possible.
Yeah, and now this has a connection with the British Empire because when the English start making claims in the Americas, particularly during the reign of Elizabeth I, John Dee, who's one known as a magician, occultist, sort of advisor to the Queen's astronomer and astrologist, and the man who was one of the first men to coin the phrase British Empire, brings this up. And this is used as the claim to say North America is ours. We got first. This Welsh prince got there first, therefore it is ours. So it's an interesting connection between different history there.
Sounds perfectly reasonable to me, but anyway, yes.
Now, at this point, I will bring up something which I know you don't know much about, and most people in the chat won't know much about, but which I find endlessly fascinating. And you could argue this is sort of modern myth, modern in sort of the sense of it being from the 19th century, because it is something that is known as British Israelism. Now, I just want to say to people that this has got nothing to do with Israel or Zionism. This is something completely separate from that.
So you're not going to tell us anything about the Eternal Anglo.
No, it's a strange sort of religious idea from the 19th century. It's the mid-19th century. I mean, when we spoke about the abolition of slavery, I mentioned the Great Awakening that brought about the evangelical movement that produced the abolitionist movement in Britain in a big way in the 1780s. Well, there was another awakening in the United States and to agree with Britain in the 1830s and 1840s. Now, from that, you do get sort of Christian Zionism, but there's also a sort of another strand, which is this thing called British Israelism. And it's the idea that the British are the descendants of both the Anglo-Saxon English and also the Celtic British are all descendants of the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Now, for those who don't know, now,
Okay.
this is a very interesting. So for those who don't know, the lost 10 tribes comes about because when the Neo-Assyrian Empire conquers the Kingdom of Israel in it's 720 BC, they go into exile, and then all but only 2 of the tribes return from exile, and the remaining 10 tribes are known as the lost tribes. And there's all sorts of myths of where they went, who their descendants are. There's a suggestion that that there's a tribe in Africa that is descended from one of them. I think the Armenians claim a descendant from another one, and there's all sorts of interesting myths. So, but in Britain, until the 1830s and 40s, there was a development of this idea that, okay, yes, that because we are a sort of moulding, we're a combination of the Anglo-Saxons, the Celts, to a degree the Romans. Yes, I also believe they make the claim as well. Yeah, yes, absolutely it is. And Baldwin, I am going to present to you in a bit the most schizo of advocates of the most schizo idea and Hitler ever came up with. So in the 19th century, you've got this sort of development that and obviously this is the height of the British Empire. We are the greatest power on earth at that point, and the sense that there's something special about us. Quite rightly, there is something special about us, but
they couldn't just sell for Brutus and the Trojans.
No, they wanted something more, and so you get this book called Our Israelitish Origin in 1840, written by a man called John Wilson, and it suggests that we are the descendants of whether we're Celts or Anglos, we are the descendants of these 10 tribes. Now, interestingly, the claim is made that most Israelites were not Jews. So the Israelites we are descended from aren't Jewish, which is a strange thing to make, but there's some arguments among actual historians around sort of the development of ancient Israel that not taught that sort of Judaism was something that was more multi-ethnic. So that might be something they get into, but if
you look at modern Israel today, and I hesitate to do so, but if you do, if you look at it in the ancient world, there were plenty of people in what today is modern Israel who were not Jewish. So all right.
Yeah, and and so Wilson makes the argument that the other descendants of these tribes, of these lost tribes, are the Scythians, the Cimmerians, the Goths, and then of course the Anglo-Saxons, ancient Britons are descendants of these people.
I mean, I've heard that the Ethiopians, who of course were Christian in the medieval era, I've heard that the Ethiopians were one of those, and there are African Jews who the Israelis fairly reluctantly had to accept into Israel, for example. But all right.
Yeah, and I mean, with the Ethiopians, they also have the myth of they also have the biblical element of
press the John and all that stuff.
Yeah. There's also the other one. I've got to name that. Queen of Sheba. The suggestion is that the founder of the Ethiopian royal family was the son of the Queen of Sheba, and I think it was King Solomon who she slept with.
Oh, what so you're talking about Haile Selassie and all that stuff?
Yeah. So according to the mythology of their nation, the Ethiopian.
It's a shame they ended up murdering him and burying him under a toilet. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and also I'll end up this thing about the Ethiopians is that one of their legends is that this son ended up going back to visit Solomon and stole the Ark of the Covenant, and it is presently, according to the Ethiopians, in a place in Ethiopia itself under God.
Okay. I mean, look, one of the things I'm aware of is that when Italy invaded Abyssinia, as it then was, in the 1930s, and some liberal British politicians got very upset. The slavery was entirely legal in the whole of Abyssinia.
Yeah,
it was like the Italians who banned it. But, you're not allowed to say that because you can't pretend that Mussolini was better than King Haile Selassie. So, whatever.
Actually, when it comes to slavery in Ethiopia, he wasn't truly abolished in a real sense until, sadly, the communists took over in the 70s.
I can believe that, yeah. Look, slavery, I lived in Africa from the mid-1980s until 2000, and slavery is making an enormous comeback in Africa because the white man has left, and it was the white man who banned it. It wasn't the Africans, but whatever.
And of course the big movement for what the British go into Africa and the interior is to abolish slavery.
Yeah. When you see British armies marching against people like Kumasi in Ashanti and Gordon in the Sudan and all this stuff, the Brits are trying to ban slavery for the most part. There wasn't really very much in the interior of Africa in terms of riches. It was mostly done so we could ban slavery, really. Zanzibar, another example that I know Aaron knows about because it was Lord Salisbury who took Zanzibar over as a British possession in exchange for what's it called? The island off the coast of the German harbours.
Heligoland.
Yeah, Heligoland. Salisbury exchanged Heligoland for Zanzibar, pretty much. And the Brits took over Zanzibar not because Zanzibar was worth having, but merely because it meant we could stop the slave trade there. But, whatever. Much thanks we get for it these days.
Yeah. And much good it did the Arabs when we left, given what happened to them.
Yeah, 100%.
So,
Baldwin in the chat makes a good point.
Yes, that's quite true.
Because they actually did. And when the Americans and Brits were invading Italy via Sicily from North Africa, the Americans actually got loads of mafia dudes to support that invasion. Because, as Baldwin II says, Mussolini got rid of them pretty much. But, true. Yeah. But you're not allowed to say true things like that these days. So,
Yeah. Interestingly, one of the people the Americans used was Lucky Luciano, who was in a American New York jail at the time. And, they used his connections, and he was the man who helped set up the what's now known as the French Connection, with the Corsican mafia, with heroin that was coming from what was then French Indochina through Marseille into the US. He helped establish that in the 40s after he's left out in 46 for his help during wartime.
But it was a war for freedom, Aaron, don't forget it. It really was. They keep telling us that. But anyway, whatever. Yeah, so you do carry on with your British Israelism, which is, I've got to say, something I know nothing about whatsoever. But,
Well, with the sort of Celtic British, the main argument that the British Israelis make is the idea that the Picts are descendants of Scythians. So this goes back to the Venerable Bede, who made the suggestion during his time. And there's also
the Scythians were like horse people from the steppes.
Yeah.
How did they get to Scotland, for God's sake?
Perhaps their horses the horses turned into turned amphibious.
They were seahorses.
Yeah. And they, for example, they also draw from the idea that in Herodotus, the Scythians are called Scolotti. And so this idea of Scolotti, Scotland, Scotty, all put together. So it's very, it's you could argue to one degree this is the product of a feverish mind, a fevered mind.
You could. I mean, given that the Scots, the English were not particularly cavalry dudes, but the Scots were even less cavalry dudes, because Scotland's not very good territory for horses. But
and then there's another argument that because one of the lost tribes was the tribe of Dan, and you have places like Danube, Denmark, the Dardanelles, Dunkley, Sweden, London. This idea
sounds like reaching to me, I've got to say. But
I was surprised that they didn't. Some of these British Israelis didn't dislocate their arms trying to reach with some of this stuff.
Yeah. Alex Cove in the chat says Scotland will save you from Islam. I reckon we'll save ourselves from Islam, but anyway. Although that includes the Scots, because I'm British and the Scots are British, so yeah.
Yes, I should say my maternal grandmother is from the Scottish Highlands, so yes.
Yeah, I mean my father's mostly English, but he's got some Scottish ancestry.
Yeah.
And I'm very fond of Scotland. I lived in Stirling for a while, very nice town when I lived there, but that was a long, long time ago. But
yeah, Scotland is one of the places where I really want to go visit when I get the chance.
Oh, it's beautiful. I mean, one of my favourite parts of the British Isles, one of them is Cornwall, but the other one is Scotland, right up in the northwest around Cape Wrath. It's absolutely beautiful up there and really empty too, but lovely. I mean, if you get nice weather when you're up there, it's just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
They do get nice weather in the summer sometimes.
That has just reminded me. I'm not sure if you watched Grand Tour, Duke. With Clarkson, May and Hammond. They did that joke on lockdown where they said, "What the Scottish policemen say to the sunny June, given as they never see the sun."
Oh, look, you used to be able to buy postcards in Scotland. I don't know if they still do them. But it's basically a sheep in Scotland. And you have summer, autumn, winter, and spring. And basically, in the summer it's raining, and in the autumn and the winter and the spring it's snowing. But it's not true. Like I've been to the Summer Isles, and they are called the Summer Isles, by the way, off the west coast of Scotland, when it's been like 80 degrees, and you'd think you were in the Mediterranean, to be honest with you, and the water's much clearer than you get in the Mediterranean. So whatever. Yeah. And there's seals and all sorts of beautiful stuff. But yeah, Scotland's lovely.
Yeah. And there's just to go on the British Israelis, and there's also another end of it. And again, this is another part of the reaching. So there in the Bible, there is a reference to the idea of the people being of the covenant between Hebrews and God as the Berithis, and this apparently it gets translated into the British.
Oh my God!
Yes.
Somehow,
Yeah.
some way, yeah.
Oh, and there's another one of these where obviously Wales in Welsh is Cymru, and the British Israelists say that Cymru comes from the Syrian Grimri via the Simians, the Cimmerians,
Yep.
and then Cimbri. Yeah.
There's a lot of mental reaching going on there.
Yes.
There really is. Were these from a particular Christian sect or anything like that?
Interestingly, it seems to be broadly across sort of British Protestantism. So you've got Anglicans, Calvinists, Methodists. It seems to be something that took hold in Protestantism in Britain throughout the Victorian era into the
just general crazies then.
Yeah. Yeah. And there seemed to be something about it seemed to sort of attract a certain sort of officer in the British Army and the Royal Navy, because I think I mentioned in my my post on X about this that one of the people who was a strong believer in British Israelism was Sir Jackie Fisher, of all people. And I think both Gordon of Khartoum and Lord Kitchener both had some sympathy with it as well. So I think there's, again, with the Royal Engineers, there seemed to be something in the water.
So you're telling me Jackie Fisher, the Admiral,
yes,
the guy who had the dreadnought built, was in that case? Okay.
Yeah. Well, great men aren't always necessarily known to be uneccentric, shall we say, Duke?
Yeah, fair enough.
They can have eccentricity both.
I mean, I'll say about General Gordon. General Gordon, he thought that the Garden of Eden was in a particular place, and I think in Seychelles, wasn't it Gordon who said the Garden of Eden was in the Seychelles?
I think he might have been, yeah.
And he based this on one of the trees that grows there that has a peculiar shaped fruit which looks rather like a lady's private parts. I mean, I've been to the Seychelles. I went there for my honeymoon. But yeah, Gordon had his eccentricities, as you say.
Yeah.
So fair enough.
Yes, sir. And then another,
as for Kitchener collected objet d'art, but also the Mad-Eye's skull. So, strange people.
Yeah, there's
the Mahdi's skull, I should say, not the Mad-Eye's. But yeah.
The Victorian era was a great era, a sort of pinnacle of British civilization, but it also, as with all great eras, it has its seam of eccentricity with it.
Sure.
Yeah. And I will just finish up this bit about British Israelism before we go on to the man who took it to its ultimate schizophrenic conclusion, which is that another part of this is the idea that the British royal family are descended from the house of King David, which that itself isn't that unusual because that's obviously a part of the stuff. If you look back, as we mentioned before, with Brutus and the connections with the Bible, so that's sort of you could argue a sort of 19th century version of it.
Damn, I thought they were Germans. Okay.
And so so they get the idea that they're a descendant via the daughter of Zedekiah, who's the last king of Judea, and then things like that. And then one of them marries High King of Ireland, and through that you get descended through various kings through to I think it ended up that one of her descendants ends up being King Alfred the Great. So how that works over the sort of centuries intervening between this mythical woman and Alfred, I do not know, but it happened.
Hands off my Alfred the Great. But yeah, okay.
Yes, yeah.
Besides, he was descended from Woden. So.
Yes. Yeah, actually, bringing that up, there was Charles Kingsley is famous for writing the Water Babies.
I know the book, yes.
He was also an Anglican clergyman. He wasn't, I should point out, a British Israelist, but he did claim that the British monarchs were the descendants of both Jesus and Odin.
Well, so did Alfred the Great to some degree, but mainly Woden. I don't think he ever said anything about Jesus, but okay, fair enough.
Yeah, so
all things are possible, I suppose.
Yeah, so so definitely the Anglo-Israelist thought. Now I'm going to bring you on to a man who I only discovered a few years ago, but this is the most schizo of the Anglo-Israelists, and he was a man called William Cummins Beaumont, and he lived from 1873 to 1955, and he was, in his sort of daily life, a journalist. He wrote for the Daily Mail, he was editor of a newspaper called The Bystander, and also he was editor of the Graphic newspaper, which I think that went on until the 50s, maybe.
Yeah, I've heard of it. And you can find pages from it on the internet even today.
Yeah. And and in terms of his family, he was related to Daphne du Maurier. His uncle. He was the uncle of her mother, Muriel du Maurier. So he has family connections there. But now I'm just going to read you from. This is a summary of Cummins Beaumont's views, which is on Wikipedia, and it's quoting from a book called Facts and Fallacies, which was published in the Reader's Digest in 1988. In a series of books published between 1946 and 1949, the British journalist William Cummins Beaumont astonished the world with the following revelations. Jesus of Nazareth had been crucified outside of Edinburgh, Scotland, the site of the ancient city of Jerusalem. Satan was a comet that collided with Earth and caused Noah's flood. The ancient Egyptians were in fact Irishmen. Hill is to be found in Western Scotland. The Greek hero Achilles spent his childhood on the Isle of Skye. Galilee, the birthplace of Jesus, was in Wales. The ancient city of Athens was in reality Bath in England. And to top this off, Cummins Beaumont started his radical revision of history with the belief, innocuous enough, that the lost island of Atlantis might be Britain.
Well, as we said earlier, our Britain can be quite damp, but
yes,
not quite sunken. How did this chap allow for Athens being still a place? In Greece, I mean.
The problem with this, Duke, is I haven't actually read his books because his books are relatively expensive. But as soon as I read them, I will tell you. It's just that description is just British Israelism at its most extreme form. It is just. Yeah.
The only thing I'd say to you is, are his books available on, say, Z Library, for example?
I have no idea. I've been.
That's what I do. Like, if I see a book that is like, I don't know, £1,000 or something, I'll go to Z Library in that circumstance. And if they're older books, which it sounds like they are, you might find they're on Z Library.
Okay, I'll have a look because I'm just going off that description. His books sound like a wild ride to read.
Yeah, like I'm just thinking. I mean, if Athens was Bath, then why is there an Athens in Greece? It's with like ancient temples on the Acropolis. That would sound like a difficult argument to me, but you know, maybe.
I mean, if he was alive today, he'd more than likely say that was built sometime years later to sort of hide the fact that Bath was
Achilles being in the Scottish island, that would have been quite chilly for him. I guess, but, you know, but the Scots like their kilts, so who knows?
I've got to say, I do find that the one that really gets me is the idea of the ancient Egyptians were in fact Irishmen. Just the idea.
I'm not sure. If I was an Irish, well, I mean, my mother was born in Ireland, but if I considered myself an Irishman, which I don't, but if I did, I'd probably be a bit insulted by that. But anyway, whatever. You know.
And then of course that one there, that one in the last bit, Galilee, the birthplace of Jesus, was in Wales. I mean, again, the question comes: well, if Wales was really Galilee, what about Galilee that exists today? Just
and like, you know, the Romans ran Israel.
Yeah.
What's Israel today? It was a Roman province. You know, everyone's heard of Pontius Pilate. Curious, you know. I mean, all right, they ran Wales eventually, but rather later, you know. It's like,
yes.
But people get some curious ideas sometimes.
Yes, and it's like that one. I'm not sure if you've seen it, the Tartarian conspiracy theory people have now. The idea that that was this huge great civilization existed, and then a combination of the Catholic Church and people in the 19th century covered it up with mud floods and all this nonsense. That's just that's the one day equivalent to this. Except this is a lot. I've got to be honest. This stuff from Commons Beaumont is at least a lot more entertaining than this.
I've got to tell you, Alex Core in the chat, the Romans actually conquered all of Wales eventually. They conquered a great deal of Scotland and went much further north than most people realize. I mean, most people know about the Antonine Wall, which is roughly where Edinburgh and Glasgow are. Like if you're going on a train between Edinburgh and Glasgow, you can see parts of the Antonine Wall, which was Roman. But they went way north of that, right up into the Highlands, and a Roman fleet sailed around the top of Scotland. And I think it was Tacitus's father-in-law, I believe. What was his name, Aaron? Begins with A. I can't remember his name now. But he did lots of this conquering as the Roman governor of Britain. But he estimated he needed 1 legion to take Ireland. And the Romans thought it wasn't worth it because they wouldn't make any money from it. Yeah.
I remember that footnote at the beginning of Gibbon's History of the Decline of Thor, and how he mentioned that this fact somewhat grieves modern Irish nationalists.
One legion, but the Romans didn't think it was worth it. So 5,000 odd men, about 5,500 men, but the Romans said, no, we're not going to make that amount of money from Ireland, so it's not worth doing it. And of course, Dublin started as basically a Norse Viking slave trading port. That was the origin of Dublin, but you
know. I think in the original language, Dublin's Blackpool, I think, which also happens to be why Blackpool's called Blackpool.
Yeah, and someone in the chat is asking, Boudica, is she a real person? An American is asking. I can tell you, yes. Boudica was absolutely a queen of the Iceni, I think.
Yeah.
Who the Romans mistreated, and so she led a rebellion. Alex Court says the Romans did conquer England. Yeah, they did. It took them about 80 or 90 years, but yes, they did.
I believe the Romans did, whilst they also didn't conquer Ireland, I believe they had a small trading mission somewhere on the...
Yeah, they did, because you find Roman coins and amphora and bits of Roman pottery and stuff made their way into Ireland. So yeah, they knew about it. I mean, as I say, I think it was Agricola was the guy I'm thinking of. He thought he could conquer Ireland with one legion, but the Romans said, nah, it's just not worth it. So anyway. And Bill Tavern says Labour conquered Britain in 0 years. And then he says 30. I don't know what you're talking about, mate. I detest the Labour Party now. And I've always detested the Labour Party. And I'm 65 years old. So as far as I'm concerned, they haven't conquered anything. But whatever, we'll see. Yeah, that's interesting, Aaron. And even more crazy than the Christian Zionist, if you ask me.
Yes. Yeah.
They're pretty crazy, but you know.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, and it's not. Sorry, I don't know why it's not so well known, given it was something that had quite a bit of sort of currency in Victorian and Edwardian Britain, but it's something that's seemingly forgotten now. There are one or two sort of organisations. So there's an organisation in the United States called the British Israelism Association, and they still continue to support this idea. And there are one or two. They got branches around the world. I think they got one in Britain, and I believe they got one in Australia itself. So
I will not be searching them out. I have to tell you. Aaron, I think I can live without more craziness in my life. You know, it's bad enough. I had to ban some twat, like block him on X on Twitter yesterday because he was a lefty and he was saying all those England flags and Union flags that people are putting up in Britain at the moment are made in China, and apparently that makes some difference. I couldn't quite work out why, but he thought it did. So I just blocked him anyway.
It's the same as the sort of stupid argument you get every St. George's Day where idiots St. George was a Turk. Or, no, he wasn't. He was a Roman of Greek descent. And he wasn't living in Turkey. He was living in Cappadocia, which is part of Asia Minor.
The Turks at that time were still way in Central Asia, insofar as they existed at all. And St. George was a Christian Roman officer who spoke Greek, and he was not a Turk, not at all. And English soldiers have been using his name as a battle cry going back to the third crusade under Richard the Lionheart in the 1100s. So and it also should be pointed out the same people who say that rarely say that's debate to say that Hungarians who use St. George or some of the other nations. I believe Russia. Russia likes St. George. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
And so they don't seem to be. Part of the reason for that is, I think, is that they are, for the most part, historically illiterate. So they wouldn't even know about it, let alone reference it.
Dissident Knight in the chat is asking, and I don't know this, is there a connection between the Israelites and the evangelicals?
Yes, I believe that the chap I mentioned at the beginning, the man who wrote the book that sort of started this off, John Wilson, I believe he was an evangelical, and it did take off among evangelicals, but it also took off among High Church Anglicans and Methodists and all sorts of people. So it was something that seemed to take over Protestantism in Britain, and evangelicals were very much people who were a part of it, but it wasn't restricted to them.
Okay. I mean, I do know that some of the evangelicals believe in Armageddon and all this nonsense, but I can't say I follow it greatly. So did you have any more myths you wanted to talk about?
That's as much I can think of at the moment. So that's about that's it. I think that's all I can do.
Now you were telling me earlier you've got a big project coming up on your channel. Would you like to give people just a trailer for it?
Yeah, it's going to be a video. It's going to be unusual for my channel because if you watch my channel, for those who don't know, my channel is Aaron James Hook on YouTube, and most of my stuff is just book reviews or occasionally film reviews where I will just sit there and I will give you. I'll have some notes, but I won't have anything really scripted. With this one, it's going to be very much scripted because it's going to be a review of a drama that was on the BBC in 2017 called Three Girls. And this is the dramatisation of the investigation and then trial of the Pakistani Muslim, one of the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs that was operating in Rochdale. In
the so-called grooming gangs, as they euphemistically refer to them,
Yeah, and this is interesting because it doesn't really, though they use the phrase Asian gangs, it is very clear when you're watching it that they are referencing to Pakistani Muslim gangs, and it's for a BBC production. It is astonishingly explicit in who's committing the crimes and why they're doing it, and it portrays real people. So, for example, one of the people who's involved in investigating this is portrayed on screen. Can't remember the actress's name, but the character is Maggie Oliver, who's a real person who's very much a campaigner against grooming gangs.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's and Andrew North at the Times journalist who was the one who really broke it in the mainstream press is in it, and the whole thing it's astonishingly, as I say, astonishingly explicit. And so when I'm going to do a review of it, it's 3 episodes, and if anybody wants to watch it and you are in the EU or in Britain, you can watch it because it's on iPlayer. It was put up there this year, which I was astonished to discover given how explicit that programme is about what's going on. I wouldn't have thought the BBC would have wanted to put it up, but it is up there, so you can watch it. I would recommend people who haven't seen it to go and watch it. And so I'm going to do a review of it, but I want it to be scripted, partly because I want to make sure I get it right. And as with most people...
Be careful, Aaron, that you don't fall foul of the latest restrictions on free speech that the British government has brought in.
Yes, I'm going to make sure I be careful with my language, but also I do want to bring in various real life cases to show people watching it that even some of the more sort of extreme elements that are portrayed or described on screen are not fiction; they're real. And so I'm going to use a lot of clips in there. So I'm also going to use. There's a clip. Can't remember when it was from, but it's Nazir Afzal, who was the Crown prosecutor who prosecuted this case and prosecuted quite a lot of cases in the North East. He, I think it's in 2019 on the Today programme, there's a clip of him saying that in 2009 the Home Office sent around a circular saying, "Don't prosecute these crimes." So I want to include that in the programme itself. So I've really got it scripted, so it's going to take me some time. Hopefully I should get it out sometime in September, but I don't want to say when just because...
No, fair enough. Well, when you know when you're going to do it, let me know and I'll obviously plug it for you. Look, important subject, Rupert Lowe and Restore Britain and what have you, but not reform, are pressing for inquiries and all the rest of it into this stuff. So, and it's still going on all over the country. It's the Labour Party don't care because they mostly care about their Pakistani voters, basically, who I would like to see removed from the country. But anyway, the rapist ones, I mean. But yeah, interesting stuff, Aaron. Aaron's there'll be a link to Aaron's channel under the stream in a pinned comment later on. So if you want to follow Aaron Hook, you can do so. Thank you for coming on, Aaron. I am going to play us out. Oh, by the way, yeah, we'll be back on Saturday, of course, with our normal Splendid Isolation stream. Hopefully, Aaron will be a guest on that one. He wasn't last week because he was doing family stuff, but hopefully he will be next week or this week coming. And I'm going to play us out with a tune which I hope is appropriate, assuming it works, of course. There you go.
There chanced to be a peddler bold, there chanced to be. He strapped his pack along his back, and so merrily trudged over the lea. By chance he met two troublesome men, they chanced to be. The one of them was born Robin Hood, and the other Little John so free. Oh, peddler, peddler, what is in thy pack? Come speedily and tell to me. I have 6 bolts of the gay green silk, and silken bowstrings 2 or 3. Well, if you have 6 bolts of the gay green silk and silken bowstrings 2 or 3, and by my body cries Little John, one half your pack belongs to me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh nay, said the peddler bold, oh nay, that never can be. There's never a man from fair Nottingham who can take one half it back from me. But then the peddler, he pulled off his pack and hung it low down by his knee. If you do move me 1 perch from this, let me back and all shall gang with thee. Then Little John, he drew his sword, and the peddler by his back did stand. They fought until they both did sweat, till he cried, "Peddler, pray hold your hand." But then Robin Hood, he was standing by, and he did laugh most heartily. I'll find a man of smaller scale who could thrash the peddler and also thee. Go try you, master, says Little John. Go try you, master, most speedily. For by my body cries Little John, this night the peddler has well walked me. Then Robin Hood, he drew his sword, and the peddler by his back did stand. They fought until the blood in streams did flow, till he cried, "Peddler, pray hold your hand." Oh, peddler, peddler, what is thy name? Come speedily and tell to me. Come my name, I never will tell, till both your names you have told me. While the one of us is born Robin Hood, and the other little John so free. Now says the better it's my goodwill, whether my name I choose to tell thee. Well, I'm gambled on the gay green woods, traveled far beyond the sea, the killing a man in my father's land, and from the country was forced to flee. Well, if you gamble gold on the gay green woods and travel far beyond the sea, you are my mother's own sister's son. What nearer cousins can we be? So they sheathed their swords without delay, and into the tavern went straight away, into the tavern where they all did die, where they cracked their bottles and drinks their wine. Where they cracked their bottles and drinks their wine.
And that was from Patriotic Archive, who is a good friend of the channel and a member of my Discord. And if you like good folk music and also naval and military music, go and check out his channel. All right, thank you very much to my guest this evening, Aaron Hook, for his enlightening information on British myths, some of which were stranger than others. And we'll be back on Saturday with our normal Splendid Isolation stream about politics and current events. And in the meantime, don't let the bastards grind you down.